anniversary refines and the very first Mythic Remix plus refine. We got quite a lot to talk about in this one, so let's jump right into it.
Let the lesson begin.
What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is, as you guessed it, a weapon refine video for the month of February, which happens to be Heroes' 5th anniversary, plus the beginning of Mythic Remixes and Refines, which is great because I'm sure many of us have anticipated this. So yeah, let's jump into some of the stuff we have here. Now before we do, a couple of things as I always go through in the beginning of this is, of course, if you like this content and you want to show your F2P way to support, the thumbs up is the way to do that, and sub if you haven't already, guys. Like, come on. Show me that you guys care and that you guys love this video, because that's the best way to do it. Another thing is, if you want to actually show your beyond support on, how much effort I put into this, because these do take hours to produce these videos, believe it or not. And because of that, I would ask that maybe you guys check out the Patreon description below, maybe visit me on Twitch, or even the join button on YouTube are all really good ways to show your support, and it does make a huge difference. Some benefits, of course, is the name drop at the end of these videos, and other little benefits like Discord, where you get tons of help real fast, communication with me, of course, and some other benefits such as Discord theory analysis, like defense theories, and unit review videos. So maybe check that out. Either way, if you don't, it's cool. I appreciate all you guys, and thank you so much. We're still here after like 4 or 5 years, right? So yeah. All right, beginning today's video, we do have Air, and Air is obviously as the first mythic, I guess the first to be remixed and refined, which is cool. Air got her upgrade in the form of Lithia. She got Unity as more fodder, and of course Sparkling Boost Plus. Now if you're not sure what my thoughts are on the remix, then I did cover that in a couple videos ago, which was the update notification, so you can go check that out even before or after this video, whatever you prefer. I'm going to focus more on the weapon and where I feel her role is post-refine. Now this weapon refine is interesting. I don't want to necessarily get overhype about it. I am a plus 10, plus 15 air user. I literally use many strategies that involve air with tons of experience on air, literally since the start of his Aether Raids journey. I've had plus 10 air forever. Now I do have context because I've also used the second air with no merges before for quite a long time, and I've had many people in the community also share their thoughts on where air stands. So I'm going to make sure that I can provide a perspective that is both an invested air and a non-invested air. So this weapon is very interesting because it is somewhat of an upgrade. Now I don't want to confuse you there, but it's not a strict better weapon than even the base Lithia, and I'll explain why. So first of all, the HP condition has been changed from 50% to 25% on her. She keeps that impact effect, meaning the foe cannot auto double back or cannot double back as long as they don't have some QR or no follow-up, and then in which case it becomes more of a speed check scenario. But she does get an additional guard effect on her weapon, which in my opinion is really good. And the reason something like a guard effect is really good, because a lot of strategies that involve air as the initiator, also known as Air Force, which sets up a bunch of Gale Force and Wings of Mercy units, will really appreciate something like guard, because a lot of units may have like a 1 charge, or may rely on frontlining such as Ascended Fjorm with Ice Mirror. If you engage on turn 1 on Ascended Fjorm before she gets an opportunity to Hardy Fighter and set up her special, you actually don't have to deal with an Ice Mirror Ascended Fjorm defense in any way, and that's a pretty solid upgrade on the base effect. Thankfully it is on the base effect. Now the secondary effect, which is a condition of 3 spaces within an ally, additional 4 to all stats, and the other part, which is 20% of her HP as additional attack and res. This is interesting. It also has a Breath of Life effect on top of that within 2 spaces and on herself. That refine is interesting, and I don't want to say it's actually good, because I don't believe it really is. The thing with that refine is it kind of focuses more on enemy phase where you're near your friends. It also has a 3-space clause condition, so if you smite her in and try to initiate, it might not even be on, and that healing can kind of be detrimental actually for Wings of Mercy strategies or Desperation or anything that's HP condition which he may actually want to use. Lithiaburg's old weapon had 4 recoil damage, and that was actually good because it set up stuff like Desperation, Vantage, And of course, Wings of Mercy for your allies to jump in. So it's not necessarily a strict upgrade. I feel like its best use is probably Arena. So yeah, if I was to suggest a place to use the actual effect refine, it would be Arena. So for those who do have plus 10 air and happen to have Sea Dual Flying 4 or plan to get Sea Dual Flying 4, then yes, I think that Weapon Refine will be really good in Arena. And she's actually pretty solid in Arena because she's one of the few combat-esque type units who come with like guard, who come with healing, long range healing, res in combat from afar, and lots of stats now that make her pretty competitive in something like Arena. So she becomes a pretty solid Arena unit. Ground Orders is a great seal coming up that also would lend herself to be supportive in Arena. So I do think if you wanted to use this effect refine, it's strictly going to be an Arena type effect refine. I don't really see more use out of that, but if you think I'm wrong, then just let me know in the comments. I'd like to read what you think on that. But generally speaking, as someone who's been using air for a while, this isn't the, oh my god, amazing refine it could have been, and unfortunately, I guess it's like the base effect is an upgrade, but the refine itself is probably more suited for more enemy phase type air, or I guess as a arena type situation. Unfortunately, you can't really tank with mythics as carries. It doesn't really work in today's game. Maybe as a bonus air type effect, I could see it, but this is what I would suggest doing with air, depending on where your investments lie. So as you'll see, Air Force is still, in my opinion, one of the best strategies to use with air, similar to Ullr, I guess. Ullr and air can both kind of do this thing where they're taking recoil damage and then setting up the rest of their units to jump in. The beauty of air is that she's a dagger unit. This means she has access to Disarm Trap, and with Disarm Trap, you can safely engage on a lot of stuff. As I mentioned, the base effect having guard is actually really good, since if you run into one special type units on defense, they're not going to charge your special, they don't kill her back, and her low bulk was kind of one of her problems. So now that that's not an issue, she's going to have a pretty easy time securing kills. From what I've gathered in my experience, speed is the right approach here. You could also defense refine Lifyaberg, but I think speed is the right approach. And if you don't have Disarm Trap, then Desperation is a solid B skill. However, you will have a little bit of trouble engaging onto some stuff. But yes, speed refine over effect refine for AR, because healing is actually not good post-combat, and even the 3-space thing can screw things up in some ways. So I would suggest speed or defense refine. You can play with that a little bit, whether you think she needs a bit more bulk to survive stuff, or you think she just needs a bit more speed. Additionally, you could use Blade Session Seal instead of Fury Seal. If you think she's actually missing kills or doesn't have quite enough speed, then Blade Session is also a solid alternative seal. I actually run the build shown right there in the middle called Invested Air Force, and it is beautiful. It works really well. Even before this refine or base effect change, it's pretty good, and would recommend it if you have an air, as Disarm Trap lets you open up to a lot of different maps and get kills. As I mentioned before we got into these builds, taking on Ascended Fjorm on turn 1 before she charges Ice Mirror is now a super nice thing that air can do because of the guard effect, denying that Ice Mirror charge before it's ready, and air actually can win that fight. Finally here we have Temari support. Honestly, if you're not using air as some sort of combat or initiator, then you should just default to using Temari, where she's able to provide long range support with attack and speed debuffs. If you are running the middle build, which is the Air Force, then some teams you can lock in with Temari, and using again the Fury just ends up helping her get some kills here and there. Disarm Trap can just disarm traps instead of trying to initiate. And finally, of course, now you have Sparkling Boost Plus, which provides nice long-range healing of 20. So she can be like a unit in your corner as the rest of your team does its work, and she does that well. It's a good mythic role, honestly. If I was to revisit rankings of offense mythics, I'd probably bump up air a little bit now. Not necessarily that much better than where she was before. If you guys remember my mythics guide and tier list, she was basically last place. I do think she's better than Ullr now, and maybe a bit better than Freya. That's about where she'd stand, but she's not necessarily, oh my god, amazing. Peony, Mila, and Ashe still stand at the top of the light mythics, and if you're going to make your investments, that's probably where it needs to be. Keep in mind though, getting sparks, guaranteeing your mythic merges through the remixes is a solid idea, and Air is no slouch. She's still a very solid character and hero to invest in, even to this day. But that's enough with Air. Let's move on to the next one, shall we? And that would be Hrid. Now, Hrid is, this one is kind of interesting, folks. I don't know where exactly I would put Hrid after this refine. I feel like the biggest issue with Hrid and what leaves him as to be undesirable is the fact that Legendary Sigurd is a similar role in the same season, which is that Legendary Sigurd has 4 movement support, auto doubles, and ranged damage doesn't necessarily work really well against Sigurd. This is a solid refine ish. It doesn't do too much more than what he was already doing, and Freezing Seal 2 is probably the bulk of where Hrid's viability lies. If you don't remember what Freezing Seal 2 does, it's basically just a guard splash effect similar to Loki, which is actually pretty good. But it's not enough. So Hrid seems to be a sort of auto double, deny auto double. I'm going to just win speed, or not speed, but like these sort of combat scenarios and become really bulky. That's kind of where I see Hrid, but he's unfortunately not much more beyond that. The fact that his refine also kind of wants to double down on the bonus of enemies, foes, meaning like their buffs, isn't really all too great if you ask me, because you can't really depend on whether some defense teams or all offense teams are going to choose whether to use buffs or not for Hrid to really take advantage of that. He's probably okay in Arena, but honestly, Sigurd is the better red cav, and there wasn't really much of a chance for Mr. Hrid here to take over that role. Now, if you end up using Hrid, then you can use him with our Dual Cavalry 4, and he ends up scoring pretty well if you get your hands on that. His lack of mobility because his B skill is locked to Freezing Seal means you probably want to run Heavy Blade with Gale Force and try to get some kills and then run out. Probably what I see the best use case of him. His guard effect on his B skill is pretty good. His menace on his base kit is also pretty good. It sets him up really well. But again, not super impressive, because at the end of the day, we're pretty much comparing him to Sigurd, and Sigurd is just better. So if you want to use him, I see these particular builds for him. Note, I'm not super confident in this usage. I don't think he's like, oh my god, one of the best users of any of these roles, unfortunately. So in AR offense, again, you can use him with Gale Force and Heavy Blade and Initiate. Because of Freezing Seal support, this could be pretty interesting where you're putting guard on the opponent. He survives a lot more things because of that, is able to initiate and set up the rest of the team as he takes some damage. Something like Fury might honestly be better than Deathblow 3, just to take some recoil and set up the rest of the team. Another way you could run him is, of course, just removing the B skill, the Freezing Seal, and running him with Wings of Mercy in the B slot with someone else initiating. If you choose to run him this way, his weapon is okay because it gives that auto double effect and denies enemy doubles. So because of his high attack stat, he's not too bad in this role to jump in and probably kill everything he needs to. However, as I mentioned, there's so much competition in this particular role that I don't necessarily think he's like one of the best at it. It's just something he can do. Finally, on defense, I could see him as being literally a nuisance, meaning because he is able to splash this guard effect on your opponent, and of course he denies enemy doubles, and he hits his own, and of course he's gonna like prevent people from buffing. He's pretty much a solid nuisance on defense. However, I hate to make this comparison for the 70th time, but Legendary Sigurd is a bigger nuisance than him in almost every case, which is unfortunate for Hrid. He's basically going to live in the shadow of a better red cav in the same season. One advantage he of course has is that if you are F2P, then the F2P Legendary Remix sparks do apply to Hrid, and therefore that's, I guess, what you can count on. But I'm not super impressed, and this doesn't really do much for him other than just do what he was doing already better. His upgrade to Freezing Seal 2 is likely the best outcome for him and where he stands. Next up is Adrift Camilla's Refine, which was to be expected. So Adrift Camilla is interesting, I guess, in terms of what this weapon now does. She already had a high attack stat, so I do feel like they doubled down on this great trait of hers by actually providing true damage in the Refine of 15% attack. That's pretty good when you consider some use cases of it. Her base effect plus the Refine does end up giving her some extra attack which is okay. But you're going to really want to make sure she's on different teams that can maximize that attack as much as possible. What is an interesting base effect, though, is that she inflicts attack speed and res -5 on the closest foes within 5 spaces. I don't even think there's another effect in this game that has 5 spaces, but not only that, it splashes it onto 2 spaces of foes within there. So it has this like really powerful long-range effect. At this point, I don't see why they don't just say everyone on the enemy team just gets attack speed res -5. It's kind of like a sabotage already, considering how much range that is. It's almost the whole map. So interesting, but it's whatever. I guess it just makes her matchups a bit better. Definitely makes her tankier when you consider that she's also has this like attack speed defense res 4 on foe during combat. That might also be similar to Hinoka, Warrior Princess Hinoka, where that is a Dawn's effect and helps allies out. And if it is, you guys can clarify for me, as I haven't personally tested this out. I don't see why she'd want a minus defense on the foes. It doesn't really help her, but if it does help out others, then that makes her pretty good as a decent support unit. Now let's actually jump into some builds here featuring Camilla. I think she is a lot better with this refine though. So one cool way you could use her is on defense as a Catria Ball addition. So because of her pretty high attack stat and the way she debuffs and amplifies that attack, and because she scales off that attack, and if you enable a sort of Brave off of Catria, giving her something like attack speed form, attack speed bond 4, far trace, and joint drive is actually better than a rain for her to really pump up her attack as much as possible. She's actually hitting for pretty solid amounts of true damage, and that's what her, of course, refine does. So 15% of attack, let's say she has about close to 100 attack, is going to be like 15 times 2 true damage. Realistically, that's going to be closer to like 10 times 2 of true damage, but 20 true damage off of a Catria Ball nuke is pretty respectable, and that's not even accounting for all the other damage she might have. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good as a nuker, and it has to be respected for sure. Other places I could see her usage case is probably is a ranged tank. Unfortunately, being a ranged tank, she has to run IO shield or she would just completely fall over to any sort of bows, and the B skill selection on flyers in general isn't too great. You pretty much run either quick riposte or a trace skill, and that's pretty much it, and there's not much more to it. But she could run because she does actually have a very high deceptive bulk from the base effect, debuffing foes, lowering the attack speed, defense, and res, and of course just being able to secure kills quite well. Now if that effect where she's debuffing attack speed, defense, and res also helps out her allies, then it's really good to pair up with near save tanks and they get benefits from it as well. Finally, if you do merge Cam to +10, which is probably some of you, as Cam is pretty popular, she does act as a pretty solid nuker there as well, and could run stuff like ground orders, aerobatics from ability instead of trace. Either way, I do think this is just a solid refine and solid upgrade. Nothing too fancy to talk about here. True damage is always good, and that's what Cam pretty much does. Next up on our list here is Legault. Now Legault is different than some of the other characters that have had refines recently. There's a lot going on with his weapon, but I think the most distinctive feature of his weapon is the fact that he has damage reduction, which is still fairly rare on range units. Not too many units have range DR, and I'm not even sure physical ranged units have any DR. Like, you basically have to combine them with Flame to give them DR. Legault is pretty cool in this aspect. Of course, when you're thinking about ranged damage reduction, it pretty much is someone like all the Micaiahs. Like, basically the Micaiahs have the damage reduction monopoly, and now Legault kind of has it too. There's probably some other range characters I can't think of at the top of my head right now, but Legault is definitely an addition to this, and he does it pretty well, as he already had a decent speed stat, and by giving him a boon, flowers, and of course his weapon doubling down on this, it makes him pretty good. Now, if we want to go over the effects here, he pretty much gets just bonus attack based on total bonuses on the foe. Again, I'm not huge on this effect, as it does count, like it's very random, and whether you'll get this a lot of the time. You can't really force bonuses on your foe. You don't know if your opponents will use it. The best effect there is like on defense, where you're kind of deterring your opponent from using bonuses, I guess, if they notice that Legault effect is that. He gets attack speed with extra 5, and he also gets it on on his refine, so he's pretty much getting 10 attack and 10 speed. That helps him catch up by today's days. And the DR is capped at 30%, which is still very good. Like, even though it's not 40%, 30% is still good. Any form of damage reduction is pretty good. One thing that's actually tacked on at the end of this weapon refine is the deals 5 damage. So he's just getting a straight up like 5 true damage at the end there, which again is good. There's no harm in having something like that, as you'll probably want to use him as a nuker of some sorts. But let's talk a little bit into the builds here featuring Legault. So Legault has some pretty solid place, I'd say, if you wanted to invest in him, which is for defense with lethality. If you set up that lethality with maybe it being like 1 charge or 2 charge, and if you run him on something like Bridal Catcher defense teams, you can set up that lethality to get most of his damage out of lethality while making him extremely bulky. Because of the damage reduction effect on his weapon, he's getting true damage from there, from his weapon, and because he's super fast, he's getting damage reduction, which then makes him survive many situations. And with Times Pulse, Infantry Pulse perhaps, setting up his lethality, he's likely going to do quite a bit of damage just off of lethality, and he doesn't have to rely on the base effect or any other buffs. He's just going to clean do a lot of damage, so that's something to respect. On air offense, he actually can work as a tank too, because he has damage reduction. I mean, why not? You could technically use him as an AoE sweeper, special spiral spam, anything like that. The lack of slaying makes it harder there, and I feel like someone like Kaze is better. But Legault definitely can roll as a player phase unit, but I do think he's actually pretty solid as a tank enemy phase type unit. His conditions don't rely on him to actually player phase. They can be used as long as the enemy initiates has a bonus, or they're at like 75%, or he's at 25%. So using his high speed stat with no follow-up is a solid way to use him, combined with near save, and he's going to do a pretty decent job. Finally, in Arena, again, because he has damage reduction, he can engage into stuff like Fallen Edelgard, and Fallen Edelgard won't kill him because of no follow-up, and Flashing Blade with Times Pulse, he's going to Ruptured Sky on that second hit and kill her. So, pretty solid. As just one example, I mean, Fallen Edelgard is always something to mention, but realistically, you can set up basically every unit, any of these recent units to do that, and Legault is no exception to this. Anyways, moving on, we have Jamke. Now, again, I have quite a bit of experience with this guy, so I'm pretty excited myself to talk about him. One thing I want to mention here with Jamke is that refine may not seem that good on first impression, but it actually is. And what I want to show you guys is why it is as good as, or why it is good, and you might not see it at first impression. The first thing I did with Jamke was actually go to the Sims and see how he did versus prominent threats. And when I say prominent threats, I mean stuff like Vector or Fjorm. Now, that refine here gives him slaying, gives him just attack speed 5 on the base effect, but where the beauty is in the refine effect, which gives him additional effects based on how much more speed he has than foes. This is crazy when you combine it with Bridal Catcher, because with a more than 3 speed gives an auto double, which is at first you might think like whatever, if you're gonna double, you're probably gonna double, and then 7 gives a desperation effect. This is really good combined with Bridal Catcher, because what ends up happening is that he's going to quad when he's very much faster than the opponent. In the form of the auto double, what he does is beat out opponents who have deny auto double effects, such as Brave Hector. So in the sim shown to the left here, this is a +10 Brave Hector and +10 Ascended Fjorm, maxed out with Summoner support and Ally support, and blessed with Mythics. Jamke is able to quad with the Bridal Catcher team and kill both of them. With the pre-charge Luna and Flashing Blade 4, he's able to Luna twice, hit 4 times on both of them, doesn't care about Ice Mirror, doesn't care about Hardy Fighters, doesn't really care about anything, and just ends up just nuking both of these mega tanks out of thin air. And this is kind of crazy out of a physical unit. There's not many characters that can actually do this because they don't have that desperation effect, and that's something very unique to Jamke, and is likely something that I think is going to be underappreciated. Like this refine is probably going to be forgotten, but if people did use it, he's better than a lot of 5 stars in the game right now. So I'd be kind of afraid, and I'm genuinely considering using him myself on defense because of that power. It doesn't really take too much, actually. So the build that I simmed in that image just before that was a Desperation Nuker build, where as long as he's on a Catcher Ball, he can run Luna, he can run Deadeye, both sim pretty well. He actually has a very high base attack, so Deadeye and Luna both have advantages. Luna ends up working better when he's debuffed or the opponents are just extremely bulky. Deadeye works better when their damage reduction stacking, which happens to be through many things. Whether they're faster than Jamke, he'll still be able to do quite a bit through Deadeye's piercing on damage reduction, or units who just don't rely on speed that have damage reduction, such as Flame, or weapons that have DR nowadays. Hardy Fighter also gets pierced through Deadeye, so there's a lot of different ways to do this. Because his weapon has Slaying, he only needs a single infantry pulse on the team to pre-charge either his Deadeye or Luna. Flashing Blade 4 is really good because it means that if he's quadding with Desperation in a Catcher Ball team, he's going to actually fire off 2 of those specials even if the opponent has a guard effect, because once the special is fired initially, it goes to 2 charge, and he has 3 more attacks. Even if the enemy has Special Fighter, it's still going to fire off another Deadeye or another Luna, and obviously getting hit by 2 Deadeyes or 2 Lunas is going to hurt quite a bit. So all you really need to do is stack his attack and speed, give him some sort of Brave effect or something like Catria, and he is one of the most deadliest defense units I've simmed in quite a while. So this Refine is good. And it's probably going to be underappreciated, and I actually want to put it to the test just because I'm that curious to see how it works out. Finally, if you want to use Jamke in 2 other ways, he can be used on air offense as a PV, like special spammer. He actually does this pretty well, similar to Uller, because he can just get extra hits off the AoE. So instead of just AoEing and then a single hit, he actually can AoE and hit twice, which is kind of nice. In Arena, same effect, but what is cool there is that because of Time's Pulse and Deadeye, with Flashing Blade, he's going to Deadeye basically everything he engages into as long as he's faster. Low speed defense is really good on him. He doesn't actually need no follow-up because he has an auto double in his 3 speed check, and that's really good. So Jamke fans, you guys can rise up because he is in a solid place, and I likely will be using him myself. If you actually wanted to see that, I probably will be doing some theory crafting on Twitch literally after this video, and with the new maps, and probably Jamke as well featured there, as he is one of the older characters that I used quite a bit. So glad to use a favorite again. Anyways, back to the next batch of refines here. We happen to have Lugh. Now, Lugh is pretty interesting because I feel like no one has him. Like, this is one of those characters, it's like, why did this guy even get a refine? So here we are. Lugh is more fodder than anything because he had Rally Up Res, and hasn't really stood out because he pretty much is like overshadowed by his mom, which is Nino, if you guys don't know. This refine is notably different in how you could use Lugh, which is that he has a sort of with everyone effect where he's buffing himself and allies by defense res 6, which is great, but that synergizes with his refine. So he gets 4 to all stats with an easy condition of 25% HP. He ends up having an additional refine effect within 2 spaces for another plus 4 to all stats, so effectively getting plus 8 to all stats, and then he inflicts penalties on the foe's attack and res based on 60% of the unit's defense and res. This is a very similar effect to Divine Mist, which Legendary Tiki had. So if you are getting 12 defense and res, 60% of that is about 6 or 7 extra penalties that are applied both on attack and res of the opponent. So this means that Lugh is actually quite tanky, naturally tanky, and that is going to make him stand out compared to a lot of other ways you could potentially use him. So because of all this bulk, this debuffs that he applies on his foes, and the 8 to all stats with pretty easy conditions, and he self buffs 6 defense and res, the best way to use him is that bulk. He's not slacking either in his attack or speed because he just naturally has high attack and speed. You might see 27 defense and be like, that's terrible, he's gonna die to everything. But realistically, he's getting 8 extra defense, 6 off of the buff, so 14, and then he's debuffing foes by 6 or 7 attack. And yeah, he ends up being pretty tanky once you start factoring in mythics and other spurs and drives, or even damage reduction in the form of flame. That makes him pretty annoying to deal with when you combine impacts, no follow-ups, and other shenanigans, which will make him just really irritating to deal with. Finally, if you use him on air offense, of course, tanky stats lends well to tanky units. So again, he's going to probably appreciate a defense IV just to patch up that pretty low-ish defense stat, and then he's going to have no trouble tanking most things in the game just because he's just going to have a lot of bulk in general that comes out of nowhere based on this weapon, and he can also support his foes through defense and res. Finally, again with Arena, because he's so bulky, no follow-up, Flashing Blade times Pulse is always a solid stat, and he already has Rally Up Res, so you don't have to kill anyone else or rally fodder. But anyways, that's about it on Lugh. He's interestingly different than some other releases, but he doesn't have much more to talk about than that. Okay, next up is Winter Ephraim, the next seasonal on our list here. So this weapon has actually been changed a bit. Initially, before Refine, it was more of a slaying, I feel like a player phase type of weapon, where it was like solo condition, slaying, you get 4 all stats. So instead of keeping this kind of style, and of course he came with bold fighters, so it felt like more player phase, they've changed him to become more enemy phase style now, which is a 75% foe condition or solo, and then on the actual weapon refine, it's a brave enemy phase effect, meaning he gets to double on the enemy phase with a brave effect. This is quite unique as there's not too many characters in the game that can do this. There's basically the Altinas, there is Arden, and I believe Laszlo as well. So there's a few that do this, and I guess Solely Install for Solely Install fans, but they have TA, so they're not really worth talking about. But there's not too many characters that have a enemy phase brave effect, which makes him stand out a bit. The effects on him are pretty much slaying, 4 to all stats. He gets some healing after combat, which is okay, and the brave double on the enemy phase is what is, in my opinion, what makes him actually pretty unique, even at low merges. The fact that he also minus his attack and defense is pretty good, because that brave enemy double does require him to win his attack checks, and he should win his attack checks in most cases, but he won't always, so it is important that you build him correctly to make sure he maximizes that and gets that brave enemy phase as much as possible. If you're going to use Winter Ephraim, I feel the best 3 places to do so are going to be air defense, where you really want to bulk up his attack, his bulk, like literally his defense and res, and use him to far save and support. He's just going to get a lot of kills off of the slaying, bonfire, brave enemy phase. Like nothing really is going to engage on him and survive. Similar to Arden in this respect, actually. And in air offense, he actually has a res stat, unlike Arden. Unfortunately, he trades the HP of Arden for res, I guess, but he does have a decent attack, so you can use him there as well. Finally, I do think he has a place in Summoner Duels because of, well, he's going to secure kills without requiring a special due to his brave effect. Now, you may want to opt for Sacred Cowl. You can use Aegis if you charge his special using something like Raphael, but Sacred Cowl is the alternative to Aegis in this particular build, so you get damage reduction on both hits, both the first one of Sacred Cowl and then Deflect Magic, but you can actually pre-charge Aegis using someone like Raphael. Either way, I do see him pretty good there because high attack stat, far save, and just big nukes that don't really require you to rely on a special and support the rest of your team. Anyways, guys, that pretty much covers this batch of weapon refines. As I mentioned, there's quite a few here, and it does take quite a while to go through, compile all these images, and discuss them with as much notes as I gather and my thoughts on them. These are a solid batch of weapon refines. We haven't really had any duds recently. I think the biggest loser of this batch is probably Hrid, and not because the weapon itself or the refine is bad, but honestly because he's just overshadowed by a better red cav in that season. So yeah, feel free to watch it again. Maybe go check out my remix video from a couple of days ago. I am going to be on Twitch after streaming, of course, AR and theory crafting with the new maps because our update is out, of course. And yeah, that's pretty much it from me, folks. As a last ask, feel free to smash a like button, sub if you haven't already, maybe check out the Patreon or that member button down here on YouTube as ways to support the channel. That means a lot. Coming up after should be the Should You Pull video for the next banner. Love you guys. See you in the next one. Peace.
It's over.